see if I can. There we go. Now we can see everything, including our cool new shirts.
Thanks, Christina.
And
And Tino.
All right. We're back from a long hiatus, about a month. About twice as long as we originally planned.
There was vacation, and then we forgot that it was a Monday, last Monday.
Yeah. So I figured it would be better for us to be a little bit more prepared and just wait next week. However, in the essence of not preparing, we didn't. It's not that we didn't prepare for this. It's that I don't think we really needed to. Because today we're going to get into role playing. And now role playing is definitely
In the context of D&D.
yes. Well. Oh.
That means two things.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about where I can put my book.
I'll slide mine over.
All right. Oh, it's weird without the headphones.
I'm fine with it.
So we're going to talk about role playing from both the DM's perspective as well as the player's perspective. Still fiddling with our audio equipment. It's new. So a couple of things that I wanted to kind of focus on is how both sides of the screen keep the game or keep everyone else immersed.
So what you're saying is what the role playing has for the player playing the role?
Yeah, sure. And now, funny enough, in the DM's guide, there's a lot about world building and adventure crafting and creating spells and monsters and stuff about the planes and characters. There's nothing about role playing.
Oh, there isn't here
Oh, no.
in the player's guide.
Which is weird because you would think a dungeon master should know how to role play.
I feel like if you're a dungeon master, though, you've already you've graduated from the player manual into the master's guide, so they're assuming that you have had enough experience and interaction to know
That's fair.
how to role play.
Yeah.
Role play is important, guys.
So, I mean, at its core, it is a role-playing game, right? So, I know there's a lot of people who are not in it just for the combat, but they prefer the combat over the role-playing. Some people prefer the role-playing over the combat.
Or they like both. You can like both.
Yeah, which is perfect. I like both. I like I like role-playing a little bit more than the combat personally.
I do and I don't. I think a good campaign or a good session within a campaign has a good balance of both because I think both are fun in very different ways. However, if someone struggles a little bit with combat, it's not such a big deal. That happens. We can't figure out what spell we want to use, or we can't make a good move, or we're messing up all of our rolls. But role-playing is something that you don't necessarily have to roll for. I mean, granted, you have to roll eventually when you're kind of coming up against a decision, so to speak. But in general, the role-playing aspect of it is the part of it that makes it, to me, like extra special, unique, and fun. It's not just rolling a dice, taking whatever move that you're going to make and going on. Role-playing is what makes each session special. It's what makes the relationship special. In the current one-shot campaign that we're doing, we have different players every time, and there are certain players that I miss or wish or can't wait for them to be in that session because we have a very specific in-game rapport that makes it just extra fun.
Yeah. Man, I just had a train of thought, and it just left the station.
I talk a lot. Sorry.
Let's go back to what you're talking about with dice rolling. Whereas combat is almost, I would say it's 90 to 95% outcome of the dice, just because that's how the combat rules are written. However, role-playing is much more fluid. If you're in a specific interaction, you can role-play the interaction where you either want to use deception or intimidation, and you come up with a scenario that your character says or does, and that affects what you roll. Say if you're proficient in deception, you're going to want to try and trick someone that way versus intimidation instead of scaring them.
Well, and I think an important thing to note here, and we've touched on it very, very briefly in one of the other two podcasts in general, is that role playing is more than going, I want to stealthily make my way from this side of the room to the other behind the bar. Mm-hmm. That's not role playing. That's just throwing the word out there. The difference might be, let's say you're playing a tabaxi, like, I'd like to play the kitty cat version. That's an all black cat. Think like your cat character. What is he or she going to do? In my case, maybe it's, I might say, well, looking across the bar, I can see that the shadowy wall over here, if you don't know if there's a shadowy wall, you can imply one or just ask. And kind of make your way slowly across, trying not to draw any attention. You're doing your best to be quiet, not make any sound. You're covering your sword so it's not, jangling against your belt. And I'm just going to slowly make my way over. And the next time the bartender makes eye contact with a patient on the other side of the bar, that's when I'm going to reach over and grab the bottle. Mm-hmm. Now I've set up a scenario that, one, you can visualize. That's a description of a scenario. And two, I found this out pretty recently, but if you do set up a good enough scenario, sometimes that can affect the DC of what you need to roll to make it work.
Right. And that's a DM rule. Not every DM is going to play that way.
In our campaigns.
But personally, I feel like good role-playing should be rewarded. More detailed descriptions, more interaction with other characters in the environment. Mm-hmm. If you have a very specific something in mind that you know exactly what you want to do and you outline everything like you just said, yeah, the DC is going to be a little bit lower instead of just saying, I steal this. And maybe all you have to roll is stealth or sleight of hand, because now you're doing stealth, sleight of hand, maybe even deception to, like, if someone sees you, you're like, no. Right?
What was that you were?
No.
But I think another part of this whole, idea of description when you're talking, because this is a very descriptive game. We're lucky that we have a setup where we can project maps and have 3D figures and other things that our fabulous DM puts together so that we don't have to do as much theater of the mind. But that descriptive part is still really important because, for example, I've said this before, it's like one of my little tics. If you walk into a room, unless you're Inigo Montoya, you are not telling everyone your backstory. You're not telling everyone that you're grumpy. You're not telling everyone, that you...
you could look grumpy.
Hate dwarves. Sure, you could say, I've got a sour expression on my face. You look like you don't want to talk to me in the morning. But you can use your interactions to illustrate your personality without spelling it out for someone. It could be as simple as when the bartender comes over, you bark an order at him and slam the money down on the table and take your drink in a huff. Now everyone at the table knows the kind of person that your player is, just like they would if you were sitting with them in that bar in real life.
Mm-hmm. I really try to kind of encourage players, what does everyone see? Not what do they know, not what should they know, what do they physically see? Because that creates an aura of mystery around your character. Characteristics develop over time, and maybe when you created the character, you thought of something, some kind of background or backstory, and you're like, maybe I don't want to have that, and you can change it without anyone knowing that you had it in the first place. So,
that's true.
Yeah, I like it when there's even a lot of our players, because we have 12 players in our campaign. I have a top level idea of all their backstories, but I can't keep track of everything. And I know there's a lot of players who have stuff logged in their backstory that may never even come to light. Mm-hmm. And I probably won't even know about it. There are certain things, though, to keep players interested beyond the module itself, though, that pertain to backstories. So...
explain.
What I like to do is if, say, a character gives me a flaw or something that happened in the past that affected them, for instance, your ship or something like that, you have
the Cleopatra,
a previous enemy, something that I, as a DM, I can bring around 4 or 5 sessions later, and
Fingers crossed we have a session in Turia where those bastards blew up my ship.
but I really like to bring that kind of backstory stuff back, especially right after you believe that your players have kind of forgotten about that little tidbit.
He doesn't forget.
I have access to our stuff. I can just keep looking
If it's
at
not
it.
in records, it does not exist.
Yeah. But that's my favorite thing, especially when the look of surprise on the player's face. We're like, oh yeah, I forgot that was a thing. Damn. Or decisions that they've made in the past come back to haunt them. So remember that blacksmith that you stole some armor from? Well, he's out for revenge. Yeah.
But also, the role playing that you do, one of my biggest things I enjoy the most with different groups of players, especially, is getting that impression of their character and letting it sits with you. Like, I walk away from the table and I can pinpoint who they were based on their personality. We're very lucky in our group that we're doing with the one shot. Like, all 12 of them are either very experienced players who are good at it, and have lots of practice, or they are actors who are naturally really good at it. They don't really need a lot of pushing and prodding to do the role playing part. And so it's kind of funny where you can actually really picture that person's personality. I mean, in some campaigns we've played, there have been players where, like, I played a character who my goal was, like, when you hear him speak, maybe just when you see him, like, you kind of want to punch him in the face. And I would say very quickly in that session, I established that. And that wasn't based on, like, me, describing, like, he's got a punchable face. It was based on all the little details that I put into the character in every interaction with every single person, with everything in the room. Even, this guy was your classic drunk whoring cleric. And so
the classic whoring cleric.
And so, like, the second, we walked at one, I was like 3 hours late to the meeting time that we were supposed to be there, rudely enough. And then the moment we walked in, like, didn't wait for introductions, just, like, helped myself to this nice bar, like, without asking for permission. Every time we hit a tavern or something else in one of our adventures, I made everybody, I was like, hey, I got some business to take care of. And it would be me trying to go pick up some ladies for the night, those types of little things, let alone I tried to hit on all the women in our party as well. Not like
it didn't go very well, did it?
I did not succeed with them. Though I did have success in the tavern. Haha. I picked them up. They didn't have a great time with me, but, like, I picked them up. So, it's just little things like that. We're walking away from that session. People were like, I know exactly what this guy is all about. And there were other players in that session. You were like, I know exactly what you're like. So I think it's so much more fun. It's so much more special. It's something you don't get in any other game type. You don't get that kind of interaction.
Yeah,
I mean, other game types have pre-built archetypes. I'm pointing at where our TV and Xbox live, which you guys can't see. But even the role-playing games that you play in a video game don't have the same layer of depth that you can bring to your character.
Sometimes. Divinity Original Sin is basically D&D simulator. And your decisions affect. Never mind. We're not here to talk about that. So I said there's nothing about role-playing in the DM's guide. That was half true. There's no role-playing section in the DM's guide. There is a social interaction section.
Oh, that's where I am. But see, mine actually has the word role-play.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the player's guide.
See, mine says,
haha.
This section adds to that material by providing a structured way to resolve a social interaction.
His even reference. See, I told you, that's the graduated version. Mm-hmm. Undergrad, grad.
So I'm going to start with just this first section, which is the starting attitude of someone, not necessarily another. I mean, I guess it could play out as another player character, but as NPCs, their attitude towards you. Are they friendly? Are they hostile? Do they not care that you're there? There's been a lot of times where our players have made rash decisions because they didn't know that an NPC was willing to help. Because they didn't try to get the information.
You mean they grabbed the gnome and hauled him over the thing and shook him?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of NPCs who are willing to help, and there are a lot of players who are willing to try and have intimidation as their first tactic. And I think that while it can create some interesting, situations, It may not always be the best way to get information from an NPC.
Unless that is your character's total personality type.
Right. But that's also something within the group that you should discuss. If you have, a mouth, a bard or a paladin or a sorcerer, someone who's good at charisma, and you're going into a place isn't necessarily threatening, and you're just trying to get information, you're just rolling charisma checks, you're probably going to have one of them lead the conversation. Whereas if you have, intimidation is still technically charisma. But if you want someone to flex on someone, you're going to get someone stronger that can actually follow through if something happens.
Well, and I think too, train of thought, going in and out. Yes. That's something I think that one doesn't happen super, super often. Seeing that collaboration, because it's awkward. Like if you're thinking about playing in a character, you're not like, hey, I got high charisma, hi over here, because that's not really how a character would. That's not how you would talk about yourself. But it should be something kind of known within the party where people's strengths are, and you should let them play to them. It is gonna feel. There are times when you're like, man, like it always comes up. I need charisma, and like I'm not charismatic, so these other people always get to do that stuff. But it is one for the benefit of the party, and two. If you share what your strengths are, there could be situations that maybe you don't realize your situations are best for you that other players might be able to help you out. I lost it. There was a very good point in there, and it just scrambled. It's very late.
What I like to do, and it's really funny as a DM, is force the people who are not good at charisma into those situations.
Evil.
Yeah, be like,
Evil.
Does anyone here speak Dwarvish? Oh, only the barbarian who's got
Grunts.
like 8 charisma. Well, guess what? Everyone here only speaks Dwarvish, so I guess you're the mouth. And that also gets them into playing a part of the game that they probably won't be playing a lot as that character. So it's
still evil.
It gets to include them.
No, I do appreciate that. And the other thing that's where I was going before, in this same vein, is that when you do identify those moments, he's got to roll like this. I think most DMs do as well. Not everybody at the table can roll, guys. Whether it's a perception check, an insight check on a person, whether it's a charisma check, a strength, whatever it is, unless it's specifically a challenge that each player is supposed to overcome. As a group, you have 1, maybe 2, if it makes sense. Like if someone's translating and none of us speak the language, we can't help him translate. If someone is trying to make a charismatic play, one time I think I asked, I was like, hey, can I assist him? Because I'm, I was going to roll as well. I'm a highly charismatic character in this campaign. And it was like, well, how are you going to help him? How do you help someone? Mm-hmm. So I laid out a scenario. I was like, well, before he goes in there, we're going to have a power check. We're going to walk through what he's going to say. I'm going to feed him some sexy lines that he can kind of roll in with. So he's extra prepared for what's going to happen. And that basically slid through. So again, that's how role-playing your character can add a little opportunity for you to add to it. But also, only 1 or 2 people can roll every time these situations come up. So if you know who your strong people are, it's not meant to leave anybody out. It is this is the best, the most sense for this character. Let's have them roll for the best chance of success.
That's also something to consider when you're creating a character.
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to be the mouth? Do I want to be the person talking for the whole party? Am I okay if I do something and everything goes horribly wrong? Can I accept that happens? And, in one of my campaigns as that person, there are a lot of times where I feel like I'm kind of not necessarily stealing the light from other people, but I'm definitely running the show. And it can get a little, you start to feel guilty after a while. And you second guess yourself. You say, am I talking too much? Am I taking play time away from everyone else? I know when there's something going on that has nothing to do with me, like I kind of get disinterested. So if you are that guy, if you are the charismatic speaker, pull people into the conversation. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily affect a role in any way, but it does include your other players and help keep them immersed in the story and help them not get distracted by checking their phone or looking up something, which is really important, especially in times of long conversations.
Kind of keeping everyone focused. And on that same note, an easy way to keep yourself, in my opinion, to keep yourself engaged in the conversation, in the game, apart from paying attention, is that, you know, give your character an accent or a voice or something like that. You don't have to actually do like, you know, oh, here's me with an accent. Oh, like, you don't have to do that. But you do want to give yourself maybe just a slightly different voice than what you would normally use. As a new player, I did not realize how useful that was until I started doing it in my second campaign. It made it where at the table, I might make an offhanded comment or something else, and other players at the table who are experienced players or even not will go, wait, were you asking me that? Or like, is this happening in game? And all of a sudden you've kind of broken that wall down a little bit for them as well. And so if you have a character voice for yourself, you know, then when you talk in that voice, it's very clear to yourself, to everyone at the table, that you're that person. And it helps me understand that I am being that person when I'm asking those questions. It almost like helps me phrase the question a little bit better and think it through a little bit better.
It separates the player from the character. And I really appreciate that too, because there are a lot of times where people will ask me questions and I don't know if they're asking me or the NPC.
What do you do when you need to ask the DM a question outside of your character voice?
You just say, question for the DM, usually.
Hey, DM.
Yeah.
Do I know this already?
There's a lot of times where like I'll sometimes you forget that you're in character, and you'll ask a question maybe in that different voice or accent or something, and everyone's just gonna kind of look around and go, "What?"
Well, you what, mate?
And you know, I've also played in games where people have kept their persona throughout the whole session, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just you have to be a little bit more clear when you're separating the two. And I think there are clear separations as far as speaking within the group, because if you're talking to other players, you should be talking to their characters. You know, outside conversations are you know, they're impossible to not have. But I think that if you're having a back and forth between you and another player, it should be role playing your characters back and forth between each other versus kind of like having this telepathy conversation of your alter selves on the outside to determine what your characters are going to do.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of where we were talking a little bit earlier of, you know, you need to have, even if it's that session 0 with your party or whatever, where you're building things out, because it doesn't make sense to go, all right, who's the most charismatic person? Who's got the highest charisma? Oh, you got +4? Okay, you roll. Like,
Right.
That's not how a session would go. In a session like our one-shot, where it's kind of constantly rotating players, we need that because we kind of forget who's who and who's doing what. But, you know, in general, that's kind of the idea. When you're building your party, people should have specialties. People should have certain strengths. And you guys should be familiar with what they are, because the more that you know each other, just like you would if you were with them in real life, the better your session's going to go, the more real that it's going to feel, and the more fun it's going to be. It just is.
Yeah, it is. I feel, and everyone has a warm-up period too. Because
Absolutely.
you sit down at the table, you kind of get settled in. I know for us especially, it takes like 15 minutes to get started
at
up.
least.
Because, you know, it's the first time that people have seen each other in a little while. They're kind of catching
Cracking
up
a
a little
beer.
bit, cracking beers, getting their snacks ready.
Getting some queso.
And then, you know, when the DM goes, all right, time to go, it still takes time to ramp up into your character, even beyond that 15 minutes, because people aren't using that time to try and get in their character, which, I mean, that's
okay.
fair.
I mean, we built that into session time, yeah.
But, you know, coming from, at least on my side of the screen, I can tell when they've kind of fallen into that groove. And it's really nice because it also affects how I play. The more you're interacting with me in your own style and your own character voice, the more I'm able to interact with you as an NPC, as environment, and that kind of stuff.
It's
you get what you give.
You get what you give. Like one of my characters, the kitty cat captain, who's kind of smirky and snarky and makes fun of people. The agent they work with in their group, his name is Agent Burden, and my little kitty can't resist making really dumb puns at him about like, oh, can we leave our stuff here? Otherwise it's a burden, all this stuff. And this guy, it just goes right over his head. And it's really fun. It's those stupid little moments that make it really fun. And to me, it's always more forgivable if a player doesn't really know what they're doing, but they're like in character and like having a good time. It's immediately a better game and a better connection.
Yep. And since we have this unique campaign, those are my warm-ups whenever we have our starting, with your agent that you're trying to figure out the mission from. It warms everyone up because it gives a reason for all the characters to be in one spot. It gives a reason for everyone to interact with each other because you're kind of forced to. You're in a small room. And then you get a mission from an NPC who's, in the game. You have to interact. It's a captive audience. And that's what I use as my warm-up. And I noticed that it wasn't at the beginning, it wasn't like that for everyone else, but it's kind of become like that.
Yeah, and it's nice too in this particular campaign because we are forced to ask a lot of questions. Like we get the assignment and then we have to ask a lot of questions and stuff, and kind of like as soon as we get transported to where we're supposed to go, which is how this works in this particular campaign, we then as a group also need to ask a lot of questions and like make a plan and kind of figure out what we're going to do. So I think that both of those things kind of get everyone in the right mindset and in the groove. And I don't know, I have so much fun I wish those sessions were longer. It's not how it's built right now, but
5 hours is that's pretty long.
It is pretty long. I will say I've been in sessions that are longer. And it's a very different style of gameplay in general for the other sessions versus this kind of thing. But those 5 hours feel like they fly by. And part of that is just the amount of like kooky insanity fun. Most people are pretty engaged most of the time. Mm-hmm. It's like watching, if you watch Critical Role or any of those types of podcasts, it's the same thing. It's like you almost want to picture like you've got an audience watching you. And so the less you break character, the more in it you are, and the more in it I think everyone else is. It's so much fun.
And that might be something that we look into for our next campaign, maybe. If I can swing the tech, is we may be live streaming our next campaign.
The villain one.
Villain.
But and
morally
that's something
agnostic.
And as you guys know, we do as much as we can for Extra Life. And so, we'll set a 2020 goal for this year. And I think that to help kind of illustrate some of the points that we're talking about as well, we will, you'll get to actually see them in action in a real campaign. So I think that would be really, really fun.
Yeah, I think whenever we do that, it'll probably be on Twitch, just for ease of donations and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But that's not until like March. That's
down the line.
March, April.
Down the line.
Let's see here. What's another good thing to do? Charisma checks. We just talked about that. Role playing, being the NPC. That's me.
Be the NPC.
Yeah. The DM knows most things about the characters. NPCs know almost nothing about the characters. So you kind of have to act dumb a little bit.
That's it. Yeah, I never really thought about it. I never really thought about it that way.
And it can be a little, it trips me up sometimes where I'm about to say something. I was like, oh, I wouldn't know that. And I would have to kind of go into something else.
Metagaming.
Yeah, exactly. Metagaming.
That's a no-no.
And metagaming goes for players as well. Because...
Us?
Well, you said it earlier, when you're a new character is introducing themselves. Hi, my name is Barbara. I'm a 28-year-old dwarf, and my dad killed my mom. Like,
my name is Inigo Montoya.
Most people wouldn't come out and say that, or they wouldn't say, and I have a hateful disposition towards gnomes. When you shake someone's hand and tell them who you are, you're not going to tell them anything about that. But if you have a character who does and kind of just reveals that information at the very beginning, everyone at the table now knows that information, whether they're supposed to or not.
And it's a good practice. I think the introductions too, something to think about for your next campaign, your next opportunity to introduce yourself. by really thinking about what someone sees. Like, for example, they don't see, you're not like, I have, 3 daggers and a sword or the crossbow. I mean, yeah, they can see those weapons, but what might be a better way to put it? Like, I'm an experienced fighter. I like to use rapiers. Maybe they seem to be pretty loaded down with weapons, that regardless of how tattered their clothes are that show wear, the weapons are pristine. That tells you that the weapons are something they probably use and care about, and that the worn of their leather probably implies that they've been on a lot of adventures. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It could mean that they Poe. But, for example, it's just kind of creatively thinking about... They Poe. It's just creatively thinking about, like, what all about them. Like, for example, I have in that campaign, I have a magical hat. It does nothing except just stay perfect all the time. It's like a big, boisterous captain's hat that, like, even Jeffrey Rush / Jack Sparrow combined would be jealous of. And so even though the rest of me looks worn and dirty and, all those things, I mean, not my cat fur because I'm a cat, but like my clothes and stuff, this hat is like pristine, like unnervingly pristine. That tells you, without me actually telling you, that there's probably something going on with the hat. Either it means a lot to me, it's magically spelled, or both. Mm-hmm. And if you're a villainy NPC, like maybe you're like, oh, I'm going to target that hat. They care about that hat.
Maybe. We'll see.
Oh no. He didn't hear that.
Did you eat the whole thing already?
We're experimenting with leaving the pupper out again. He's doing all right. Okay. He's okay. He's doing good.
Cool. Let's go into our next spot, which is a little bit more DM centric. The DM is required to play a lot of roles, which can be difficult, especially if some of those players are repeating and you have to remember who those characters are, their predispositions, their accents, that kind of stuff. I have a book that I write everything down in. I have my main NPCs that show up every time, like Captain Burden now.
He got promoted.
So in that it says it's very like, male human, brown hair, this kind of accent.
Does it note that I make fun of him?
No.
Damn. Didn't make fun.
But something that I like to do, and I think I see a lot of other DMs do, is when you kind of get into those characters, you start to be a little bit more animated outside of just the voice. So you probably can see, like, during the podcast, I'm moving my hands a lot because that's something that I personally do just because it happens, but that's something you can do in game as well to exaggerate a NPC's characteristics.
For example,
they talk with their hands.
I would love to see you talk with your hands as an NPC right now.
But what's even more so than just talking with your hands is maybe you stand up, because I know sometimes, especially if you're trying to get into an accent or into a voice, it can kind of be hard to do it while you're sitting down.
He's a very physical DM.
I stand up probably
half,
if not more,
yeah.
of the session, and
lets out these terrifying, gleeful laughs when he does like the 20 grabs like 20 d6.
But I guess as a little tip, stand up, use your arms, use facial expressions, kind of get into the character, because the players are going to see that you are no longer the DM and you are that NPC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It totally makes a difference. It does.
Yeah. And you don't have to be a master of accents to be a good, voiced character. You can take your own voice and just slightly modify it. You can make yourself Batman. Or just
I would say accents.
Yeah.
It's more voice. Just do something with your voice.
Right. Pitch it up, pitch it down. Use a terrible accent. Sometimes it's funnier that way. I'm not, trained in accents. The ones I do, I pretty much just taught myself, and I've gotten better over the years that I've practiced them. But I'm not. I still wouldn't say that I'm a good, I'm not good at it.
And it really doesn't take much. It's just enough that someone knows that it's not you talking. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And you can do stuff like, say if you're a pirate NPC, you can give a piratey Blackbeard kind of to the end of your sentences.
We do with meows.
If you're playing like a lizard folk, you can kind of like draw out your S's.
Mm-hmm. Even when I'm a cat, I'll do these like just to mess with someone. I wear cat ears when I play the cat character. I need a pirate hat at some point, but
so we'll go into. I think we're probably going to have a whole, well, maybe not a whole episode, maybe half an episode on voices and voice work.
Yeah. I think, if you're someone, I mean, a lot of the people we play with are actors.
Yeah.
So they're really good at it, and it's really, really fun. But it's one of those things that it does make a difference in your session to stay engaged. And I think that's one thing that everybody struggles with, except the DM, who literally nonstop works. But I try to think about it this way. A DM, such as this, puts in, hours of work. And for us, that includes also like 3D printing all the villains and building out of the maps to project onto the table. And, when we walk into a room, it's not like, oh, you see the ceiling and the wall. Like, we're getting the full picture visually based on the description of what's going on. And then every interaction, he is, at least what it feels like to me, because I'm not a DM, I don't really know, but it feels like he is adjusting DCs and scenarios and how a character reacts based on what we're doing. So he is working 100% of the time, plus outside of the session. The least that I think I, as a player, should be doing is giving him that time back during the session. I'm guilty of it. I'll pull my phone out, I'll check it, like that, blah, 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 blah. But I do my best to kind of
I don't expect people to have their phone off for 5 hours. That's unrealistic.
But, it's just one of those, if at any point, I'm this far away from the DM, well, I would never be on the same side as the DM. If I was catty corner whatever to him and I can't really hear him without having to yell, or vice versa, then the table's too loud. And it's one of those like situational awareness, like don't make someone be the Ross and be like, just it's one of the, and it's hard to think about it too, because you're usually playing with people that you love to play with. So
I've noticed, I've played I would say outside of these campaigns, the majority of my sessions were online. Was
it different in feel?
Yeah, it was. It was a lot quieter. Not so many, and here's why. You can't have side conversations while the DM is talking, because if you do, what the DM, because it's all going through one line of communication, it's all going through someone's headphones. No one will be able to hear what the DM's saying.
That's bad.
Right. So, I think that was a little bit of an eye-opener for me transitioning from digital to the table, is that I was so used to people just focusing the entire time on the game.
Were they focusing though, or were they on their phone?
They were quiet. And if someone was receiving the information, I know they got it. Or even if they were on their phones, they still heard what was going on.
I'm just teasing.
So yeah, it was a little bit of a change, and honestly, it doesn't take much more than hey guys, reel it in. You should probably pay attention. This might be important.
Flags flying.
Yeah. It's not really that much of an issue at the table. I think we really
I think we have a good group.
I think we've only had like one time where it got a little out of hand.
And especially because we do have so many people that are new coming in, or that, we just want to play to see our friends half the time too. So you get kind of a longer, drawn out, like he was saying, kind of settle in period, and then a little more interaction outside of it. But a good thing about that to think about is, all right, then tell your DM, or have, maybe our DM is already aware. Let's have more frequent short breaks.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
One that gives his voice a rest from the 5 hours of talking, and that also gives us those like 5 to 10 minutes every hour and a half to just kind of like chit chat a little bit and get it out of our system and then get back into the game. Because it should be fun. It's not like you're trying to be a librarian over there that's like, shh. But at the same time, you're there to play the game. So there's kind of that nice balance there. And I think anybody who, at some point I'm going to want to try DMing, And so those are just little things for me to kind of be aware of, that, people are human, except when they're playing non-humans. So, be aware of that. Accommodate on both sides of the screen, as they say.
I should make you do a one-shot as a DM.
It'd be fun. It'd be weird. I mean, it would be totally within the rules of the game and like super, super on it and super focused and not weird at all.
I would have to try so hard not to like correct anything.
Yeah, I think that would be a rule at the table, that if I were going to be a DM for a session, like he can have a little notebook to write his little comments in, but like he's not allowed to correct me. I talked to one of our friends. I talked to Andrew about this.
Who?
Andrew.
Oh yeah.
About DMing it, or even like co-DMing a session where he could help me with some of the more like, one of the big things that kind of prevents me from DMing in general right now, and I think is daunting for a newbie. There are, for example, in a combat situation and stuff, I have a working knowledge enough that I think I could get by. But someone who is intimately familiar with more of the rules than I am is going to have a much easier time adjusting in battle when you can't predict what the players are going to do, unless you're a rogue and you're going to go in, swoop, go back. But in general, you can't predict it. So I think there's some things like that where, maybe for my first session, I might partner with someone that can kind of help me with that. That's not you.
Double DMing is a thing.
Yeah, that's what you're talking about. Where I want to do a lot of like story and character interaction and making fun of Tyler's character, whatever it is.
It's totally possible to have, a new, and I would probably encourage having an experienced DM kind of sitting on the side and just almost like an advisor, and have the newer DM.
But like not your boyfriend, because nobody likes to be corrected by their significant other.
That's fair. Anyway.
Role play!
What were we talking about again?
A lot of things. But in general, the role-playing part of it is, I think, is what makes D&D so unique. That really is the crux of it. It is like the original, all-encompassing role-playing game. So lean into it. If I walk away from I've played with players where like, I'll walk away from the table and I could not tell you who their character is. And every time you leave a table with any of my characters, whether you like it or not, you know who that character is. You may not know my deepest, darkest secrets, because unless you're Inigo Montoya out for revenge, you're not sharing them. But you are going to have a very thorough grasp of the personality.
Yep.
Or if you're, a double agent or whatever. You have the fake personality, because he's doing that in a thing.
Another thing that it's not in any of the books, role playing during combat.
Wait, do tell. Yeah. Do tell.
So I'm not going to tell people to do this.
Which means he's telling you to do this.
No. I think the correct way to play it, there's nothing that says it, and there's no reason you would have to do this. I think the correct way to participate in combat is to do it the way your character would. Not the way your brain thinks, but the way your character thinks.
That's good. That's very true. I'm guilty of not always, I think, succeeding in that arena.
Yeah, and it's not easy to do, because a lot of people will separate the RP parts from the combat parts, and then when they come together, they're focused on the combat. They go, okay, they go into strategy mode, and they want to do the most damage, get out of there as quick as they can, and get everything done that way. However, I find that sometimes it can be more fun if you act closer to your character's archetype. Sometimes people will get mad at you for it because it's not the most strategic thing to do. but it's what the character would do.
Like we had Sir D. We were on a slaver ship. I remember this very distinctly. We were on a slaver ship and attacking the slavers, and there was one like slave or dwarf that was chained up, and at some point he dropped his weapon or didn't have his weapon, so we just like grabbed him and like used him as like a beanbag to smack into the bad guy. It did successfully damage the bad guy, but like it knocked the other guy unconscious. It killed him.
It killed him. Yeah.
Ooh, yes, it killed him, which kind of pissed off some of our more lawful, good aligned character. Again, not the player. It pissed off the character. That is a very important distinction. That is just hilarious. Like, it was so unexpected and ridiculous and hilarious and totally in character for that character. And little things that, like, Christina plays kind of a haughty, not like a hottie, but like a haughty elf, who stands far away from danger and will just, like, fire eldritch blasts into the danger. And that's, like, she's, like, not going to go get in the line of fire, which... when you're someone who kind of repeatedly has to be in the line of fire, you're like, man, like, are you going to ever join us? Kind of like jokingly. But that's what that character does. It makes perfect sense, and she does it really, really well.
Yeah, and that also creates conversations post-combat. Where the hell were you? What, we were up here getting our asses kicked, and you were back there farting around in the bushes.
Or like, if you're a healing cleric, whether you want to heal or not, because it's less exciting than like going in and doing a bunch of damage, you have to heal. I learned that the hard way.
But that's something that I like to recommend just because it creates situations within combat and after combat as well that kind of keeps everyone immersed. Also, if you're just talking, I rolled 18 to hit, that's 16 damage. That kind of pulls you out of the game a little bit. It becomes a numbers game at that point, not a role-playing game.
We're not here to math.
Right.
That's Pathfinder.
So, the actions you take in combat are short, right? 6 seconds per round. And especially during a long fight or with a lot of people, each person saying what they're doing can be very time consuming. And that also pulls people out of the situation because they're waiting for their turn. So I'm not saying, go into deep description of how you're stabbing them, but you can kind of give a little flair. Be like, oh, I'm behind this box. Well, I'm going to jump out behind the box and jump up and try and stab him instead of just, I'm going to run around and stab,
And especially, for something like I love playing as a rogue character for this Tabaxi. It gets a little repetitive, I'm like, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to rush up and try to swing at it with my rapier and get my sneak attack because I'm a swashbuckling archetype. And because I attack it with melee, I don't even have to disengage. I'm just going to run back. I do feel bad sometimes about that. But I try to do what I can. Like, I'll hide behind this. I'll make some sort of snide little comment or, whatever else, while still keeping the pace clippy.
Right.
I would say almost never sacrifice a ton of time for an interaction unless it's like special, important, unique.
Yeah. I usually say, talking is a free action, right? So if you do something and you make a revelation once you've done that action, you can turn to the rest of the party and say what's on your mind. It's got to be a quick kind of like one sentence thing.
That's also helpful because sometimes you get information, like if you're a character who's close up and you can tell something about it, holla back at your party.
Yeah. Imagine that. I'm trying to think of a situation. Imagine that, someone is one-on-one with a spellcaster and they see that this caster is starting a spell. That might, I don't know many spells that take more than one action other than like ritual spells, but they may be working on a spell. By the time it gets back to, one of your other casters, if they weren't looking at that enemy, they wouldn't know that they're casting a spell, or they shouldn't know that they're casting a spell. So the person who is attacking the caster says he's casting something, gets back to the friendly caster, and they can do a counter spell and prevent that from happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one thing that I'm not really doing right now. That's a good thing to think about is, how if you were in battle with 5 other humans, for example, 5 other characters, they're not all human, and you're doing something like, imagine the types of things you would say, the discoveries that you might make, like, oh shit, he swipes twice, he's got a mace.
Yeah.
Like, if you touch him, it hurt, it burn.
Yeah, I think this blade's covered in acid. Or if you deal, like, if they have a damage vulnerability and you do a elemental damage to it and it seems to be more effective, you can say, hey, I think he might be vulnerable to fire or ice.
Because just because the DM, if there's one time that you ask someone, you're like, oh, what's that weapon? What's on that weapon? Oh, it's a magical item. It looks like it did more damage than you're previously aware. He's saying that to that player, not to the entire party. Now, granted, the entire party heard it, but that's where that metagaming role-playing thing comes in. It's kind of one of those jokes that, like, if you're the only person who gets a piece of information, because you are the only one who speaks a certain language and he tells it to you, technically the rest of the party hasn't heard it.
Right.
It's kind of up to you to interpret it. So he may have some eloquent explanation, and my, less educated, doesn't give a shit pirate captain's gonna be like, oh yeah, this guy, he's the one we need. Let's kill him. Like, I may not give you all the same things the DM has said.
What I think I might do is I might start having one-on-one conversations with people. Just like go up to them and whisper in their ear, be like, this is what you found out.
Whisper.
Not because I don't trust my players to not metagame, but I think the fact that they don't know it, and that gives that player power to disseminate any, some, none, or all the information. It it empowers them. It gives them, they go, oh,
Knowledge
I
is
control.
power. I mean, every once in a while he'll give some really long-winded explanation, and I'm like, that.
Yeah. What he said.
But that's a really good point. I never really thought about the role-playing aspect within combat.
Yeah.
Now I have things to think about.
And, there are some decisions that your character would do that would not only piss off your party, but piss off the players. You might have a prisoner that you've taken that you're about to interrogate, but he also happened to kill your family. So instead of interrogating, you just execute him before you get any information out. Everyone hates you, but guess what? That's what you would have done.
And that's, I think, a really hard part for a character, especially like your inclination, and I think this is true in most video games that make you choose between good and evil, is to please everyone. Do whatever makes the most strategic sense for winning the game, so to speak. But if that's not how your character's going to play, then you're actually kind of costing your group some really fun opportunities.
Right. If everyone had, if you kind of think about it, everyone, all the people at the table have time to think about what they're going to do and what they're going to say before they actually say it.
Sure.
That doesn't happen in real life. So, not saying you should just blurt out everything, but you can, use that time to jump into your character's mind.
And if you're staying in character the whole game, it is easier to kind of think that through and to kind of be in that moment as your tiefling wizard or as your arrogant rogue or whatever it is. Like, if you're staying in character, all of these things, they're just come more naturally. And that's, I think, part of the reason we wanted a whole episode about role-playing this early. It's just because it is such a key aspect to a really fun session, both for you, the party, and your DM who puts all the hard work in. Yay, DM. Will you remember all these wonderful compliments in our next session? Yes, he will. Thank you.
No, it's too late.
It's my inspiration die.
They're over there. Behind my beautiful DM
Also, you can
screen.
get inspiration die stuff.
Oh, yeah.
For really good interactions.
Have we ever talked about that before?
I don't think we have. We'll bring it up next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have to come back
To
to
be
that.
continued.
I don't know what like topic that'll be under, but we'll figure it out.
The inner workings of the DM's mind.
I don't like that. It sounds like a lot of talking on my part.
I like that.
Let's see here. We have a little bit of time left, less than 5 minutes, I'd say.
Well, do you want to do inspiration dice now? Does this make sense?
Yeah, I guess. So.
What are inspiration dice?
Oh man, you made it weird.
I make
As
everything
everyone
weird.
probably knows,
Do they?
No.
Sorry, that was probably loud. I was trying to be.
so bardic inspiration coming from a bard, that's their class ability. They have the ability to give you an extra dice to use on ability checks or whatever. As the bards get stronger, their inspiration dice go higher. But what happens if you're in a party without a bard?
What happens?
Now I'm not going to say it.
So what happens?
Yeah, no, and this is not some. There's no. I don't think there's a rule about this. I honestly haven't
There's
looked it
totally
up.
some in here.
Oh, really?
I saw
About
it.
inspiration.
Keep going. I'll find it.
What I like to do you know what? This is good because it does fall into role playing. What I like to do as a DM is I like to reward good role playing. If you come up with a clever situation or something that, you're like, hey, my backstory says I can do this. So that means I can solve this puzzle in a different way because I have this very specific knowledge. Or if you have a good interaction with an NPC, or even if it's a good interaction with another player, and maybe you two talk out some inter-party conflict or figure out how to, you were talking earlier about trying to like hype someone up. Mm-hmm. That would give them an inspiration dice from the DM. I have, I usually I think I was giving out D4s, and I think I might have upped it to D6s.
Your DM can choose to give you inspiration for a variety of reasons. Typically, DMs award it when you play out your personality traits, give in to the drawbacks presented by a flaw or bond, and otherwise portray your character in a compelling way.
Yeah, basically what I just said.
Role playing. Benefits, in-game benefits.
Yeah, and it's incentive, and it's something you can tell your players up front. Be like, hey, I award good role playing. You can earn an inspiration dice, and it's yours until you use it, and then it's gone, and you can try and earn it back. My house rule is that you can only have one inspiration die at a time. All the players can have one if they wanted to. If you have one and you do a good role playing or something that would be rewarded, sorry, you're kind of SOL. You should have used.
It's motivation to use your inspiration die. Don't just sit on it forever, because then you can't earn another one until you use it. Use it.
So that's inspiration. I think it's a really good DM tool. Mm-hmm. Trying to keep everyone immersed and within the role playing. I tend to forget about it.
Yes, he does.
So what I think I'm going to do now that I have this nice big old thick DM screen is I'm probably going to place inspiration dice on the top, and that way I can flick them out to everyone. Yeah. If you don't catch it, you don't get it.
But yeah, I just think, kind of overall role-playing effects, understandably, because it's a role-playing game, every single part of the game, whether it's a social interaction with the other characters, with the with NPCs, whether it's in combat, whether you can get inspiration dice, which can affect and help your rolls, and in general, I think it keeps you the engaged feeling you get from doing it. You connect with your character more. Like, I love all of even the characters I made that I know are obnoxious and hate. Like, I love playing them all. I love them all.
And that's what creates the inner party, not necessarily conflicts, but the interactions. You very quickly realize who you would probably hang out with outside of the game.
Not my cleric.
And you can, I wouldn't say shun people, but if you think about it, if you're role playing a character and you're doing it right and people are shunning you, you're probably doing a good job. However,
good job. That was your
yeah.
Well, whose voice is that you always do? Eric Deckard Cain. What was it?
Oh, Deckard Cain.
Yeah.
However, don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
I've never come into contact with this, and I hope I never do. Although I have heard horror stories about this, and I know we're about to go over on time, but I think it's a good thing to say.
Yeah, no, please.
there are times where some players will make other players uncomfortable. They say that their character is going to do something that is even in the real world just tabooed. Don't touch it. You know, sexual stuff, torture. You know, things that might trigger somebody at the table. Even if that's a remote possibility, just don't even
do it. What's the point? Yeah, we read a lot. I'm really, really glad you brought this up. If you're a new player and you join a game and there are people who practice and engage in that sort of behavior, you're not with the right group. Get out of that group. Don't feel obligated to continue to play with them. I think that's really, I haven't really heard of any people I know experiencing that, but I've read a lot of horror stories. Thanks, Reddit. Haha. But it's one of those things that, like you said, there are some lines that it's a fantasy game. You don't need to cross them. There's no point in doing that or crossing those lines.
As a DM running certain modules, I do ask my players. I'll say there are specific themes within this session, within this module, that may have,
torture.
Yeah, well, like we had the children, the dead children, or the fact that you had to kill children. And I brought it up before the session. I said, is anyone uncomfortable with this? Because if they are, no worries, throw it out. Doesn't need to happen. And that's something that I feel is extremely important to communicate. And that's something as a DM, since you know the story, you have the privilege to actually say, hey, this is something that is going to come up. Is everyone comfortable with this? But I just really hope that, and I don't think it ever will.
No one runs into that.
Yeah. I don't think it ever will. So.
But good point. Anything else you want to say about role playing? In D&D?
Stop making it weird.
No, it's me.
There's so much, honestly.
I'm sure we'll touch on it. Well, this will be something you'll see probably touched on almost across in some way every single podcast, every single episode.
Yeah, role-playing affects every aspect of the game. So in every subsequent episode, you're going to hear us say something about, RP this situation, RP that situation. How's it going to, what's the outcome going to change?
You hear me requesting to do a random voice.
Yeah. At its core, it is a role-playing game. And I believe that is what makes it the most fun. There are games out there that are just straight combat, and if that's more your cup of tea, you can do that. But I'm in this game for the role-playing aspect of it. The combat is flavor. And some people think of it the opposite way.
Which is okay.
Which is fine. And you know what? There's people that think of it that way, that sit at my table. You know what they do? They still role play. They just happen to enjoy the combat more. So.
Well, I think that's it for role playing today.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll post more stuff about Extra Life going into 2020.
We're going to continue to update the website. Oh, schedule change.
Yes.
As you can tell, we are really late. It's 11:30 here.
I'm very tired.
So we are probably going to be changing the day that we are going to be doing this. I think Sunday afternoons.
Probably Sunday afternoons for the next about 7 weeks.
Yeah.
6.
Just to accommodate schedule changes for everyone. I have Sunday night D&D sessions that I'm a player in. Shay has stuff outside D&D going on that keeps her from being here. So I think Sunday afternoon, 2 or 3 o'clock, maybe even later, maybe like 5.
Yeah.
And
we'll just call it Sunday afternoon. We'll make sure to update events. Right now, we are posting events for everything as we just kind of get things more regular, and then we will stop posting events as we know that people know when they're happening at that point.
From what I tell, people usually watch this after it's. They don't usually watch the live cast.
Hello, future you.
So, I don't think it'll be that big of a deal. Yep, absolutely. I see there's people. It's
hello, people.
The 2 people. But thank you for watching. If you have any suggestions on topics, please feel free to post them on the page.
And we'd love to hear your stories too. Not just, we play with a small group of people, but there's lots of folks out there who play. What do you love most? What do you want to hear about? What horror stories do you have? I kind of want to know that too.
That would be, oh goodness, that would be a good episode.
Yeah.
Maybe not. We'll figure it out.
We'll do it in like the dark with candles. Anyway.
Yeah. All right.
Have a good night.
See ya.
Woo.